Welcome back, riders. This is episode 3 of recapping my big roller coaster trip of 2024. If you are unfamiliar with this series, I recently went on a trip to the UK and Poland, and I'm ranking the lineup at each park I went to. If you missed either of the first 2 episodes covering Thorpe Park and Alton Towers, and you're interested in hearing my thoughts on those parks, go ahead and check out the playlist in the description of this video or at the end of the video in a card. In today's video, I will be ranking every roller coaster at the Blackpool Pleasure Beach, the historic UK beachside park in Blackpool, north of Liverpool and northwest of Manchester City. Before I left for the trip, I did a pre-ranking for the roller coaster lineup, so if you're interested in a deeper explanation to what I was expecting going into riding every roller coaster, go ahead and check out the video in the card above. Like the other 2 episodes, I will be having whether a coaster went up, down, or unchanged compared to my pre-visit rankings. And of course, after I talk about each roller coaster, I'll talk about any other rides I did and share some overall thoughts about the park. Let's jump into the list. Starting at the bottom and working our way up, we have Steeplechase, a rare aerodynamics steeplechase coaster. Or should I say coasters? Steeplechase actually has 3 separate tracks that run alongside each other, so personally, I do count these as 3 separate credits, but I went ahead and I just combined them for one entry on this list for simplicity's sake. They're not really different from each other anyways. Now, it did place last, but by no means is this a bad coaster. It's just the least thrilling in the park, I would say. The racing aspect could be fun at times, but the ride is mostly straight track with occasional turns or hills that more often than not are a bit jerky. The best part of this ride is the competitive aspect, which is fun, but other than that, it just doesn't really deliver a thrilling experience. Next up is Infusion, one of those dreaded Vekoma suspended looping coasters. This one is not one of the worst out there, but I would say it's definitely below average. I did not think it tracked that poorly, to be honest, but for whatever reason, the restraint on Infusion was really bothersome to me, more so than the average SLC. It was just digging into my shoulders way more than I would have liked. It was very unpleasant, so this was definitely a one and done for me. Coming in 8th is Blue Flyer, a family wooden coaster. This is most similar to the Cedar Fair wooden coasters like Woodstock Express at either Kings Island or Kings Dominion, Zack Zoomers at Michigan's Adventure, you get the idea. So overall, it is nothing crazy, but there are some redeemable moments. I think what separates Blue Flyer from those aforementioned Cedar Fair woodies is that Blue Flyer is quite unique. It's quite older, it's actually from 1934, and just like pretty much every ride at Blackpool, the setting is pretty cool. It's sandwiched between buildings and squeezing past other coasters. It's pretty impressive. Blue Flyer even has a tunnel that I didn't know about, so that was cool. Next up is Nickelodeon Streak, a 1933 wooden coaster that is a bit larger than the previous coaster, Blue Flyer. This is a coaster that overall I don't really have much to say, to be honest. It was not particularly good, but it wasn't bad either. I will say it's just the right amount of roughness for a coaster over 90 years old. It's not too smooth, but it's not beating you up either. It's a classic out and back layout with a sea of airtime hills, but they don't really have airtime, more so just super faint weightlessness. I still enjoyed the experience, but it was nothing to write home about. Just missing the top half of the list is Big Dipper, a wooden coaster over 100 years old now, built in 1923. This coaster did fall 3 spots from my pre-rankings, but that is more of a testament to the coasters higher in the list that surprised me. That said, it still did ever so slightly underwhelm me. I honestly feel like Nickelodeon Streak and Big Dipper are comparable and that they both don't have a ton of forces despite their size. But Big Dipper gets the edge because it is the longer and more unique ride. It's got over 1,000 more feet compared to Nickelodeon Streak and is also 10 years older, so it has a little bit more charm. I feel like a lot of people aren't going to like me for doing this, but coming in at number 5 is the big one, a rare aerodynamics hyper coaster. While this coaster did fall short of expectations, I honestly can't say I'm surprised. The obvious comparison and competition for the big one is Magnum XL 200 at Cedar Point. Magnum is a roller coaster I have a ton of experience with, and I knew that big one had no chance of being better. After riding Big One, though, I have a different comparison. This is pretty much the steel version of the Beast at Kings Island. It's just tons of gentle slopes and no airtime, while you carry a good amount of speed. Now, one thing I will definitely give Big One credit for is the drop. This drop is wicked, and it's insane to me that Arrow did this back in 1994. This is definitely like a sleeper pick for one of the best drops out there, and I can't imagine it was much of a contest back in 1994. That said, the drop is quite jerky, and it's not for everyone. Uncle Nate absolutely despised the drop, but I liked it, so to each their own. But yeah, other than the drop, this ride does not have much to offer. Sure, it's fun whizzing around at a high speed, especially in the setting of Blackpool Pleasure Beach, but I'd personally appreciate and expect more forces with a coaster this huge. On a lighter note, it's time to start talking about the coasters that really surprised me from Blackpool Pleasure Beach, starting with the mock bobsled coaster Avalanche. I have been on a few bobsled coasters now, four from mock and one from Intamin. Avalanche is not the biggest, but it was the craziest, and it totally caught me off guard. I rode in the back car with Uncle Nate, and it was absolutely insane. We got airtime on a bobsled coaster. It was crazy. And, if you've been on one of these, the restraint is pretty minimal, so we were really yeeted with the airtime, and I almost wonder what it would have been like if I was sitting by myself. Besides the airtime, Avalanche just powers through the course with awesome speed. The pacing is great. The transition from going left to right or vice versa are quite powerful. So, needless to say, I was pretty surprised with Avalanche, and we were pretty upset when we went for a reride and the line was just too long. Starting off the podium is Revolution, an aerodynamics shuttle loop coaster. I had never been on one of these before, and it's safe to say that it gets two massive thumbs up from me. First off, the queue for Revolution is different from anything I've ever done. It's just a staircase up to the top platform, which supposedly is only 56 feet tall, but it sure feels like at least 100, probably more. The views are amazing with the beach. You're really close to the big one and stuff, but man, it's a workout, and I was out of breath when I got to the top. And then the ride itself was quite surprising. I sat in the front row, so the first half of the ride it wasn't anything too crazy. The launch is more like a push or shove from the back, but I still liked it. And then after that, it felt like a standard arrow drop and loop. Maybe there's a little weightlessness going into the far platform, but then the far platform is where all the magic happens, at least if you're sitting in the front like I was. It starts with the launch, which again is not crazy, but I still liked it, and it was backwards, so that added a little spice compared to the first launch. And then you hit the drop. Absolutely bonkers. A backwards arrow drop is something I've never experienced, and I'm happy to say it is ludicrous in the best way. The restraints are so open and freeing, and you just feel like you're getting ragdolled. And then before you can even catch your breath, you're going right into an arrow loop backwards. Again, never done that before at an arrow, so it was just so disorienting. You carry a good amount of speed on it too, so on its own, it's a powerful loop. But then adding the backwards aspect, it's just OP. That sequence is literally some of the best 5 to 10 seconds on any coaster out there, and it's the main reason I placed Revolution number 3. I was laughing hysterically. The last surprise from the park was Grand National, a 1935 wooden Mobius loop coaster. This was one of the most surprising coasters on the trip for me. I didn't watch a POV beforehand, and I had not heard anyone else talk about this coaster being so insane and fantastic. But it didn't start that way for me, as this coaster was the story of two tales. My first ride was on the right side, and in short, it was quite unbearable. This is definitely the roughest wooden coaster in the park, with the most bite, and I don't recall if I was on a wheel seat or not, but I thought it was too much. I was also beyond stapled, which was my own fault, but then it didn't help because there's just so much strong airtime on this ride. There's no denying that this coaster is absolutely crazy, but for my first ride, I thought it was just too much and I wasn't really a fan. Then we rode on the left side, and this time I was for sure on a non wheel seat, and I did a much better job not getting stapled, and it was a night and day difference. Yes, it was still rough, and it had a lot of bite, but nowhere near as unbearable as I thoroughly enjoyed it this time. This airtime was absolutely nuts. They squeeze it in literally anywhere possible in the smallest sections of track. It's nuts. There's just there's like an edge to this coaster, and it's so hard to describe. This is what I imagine the wooden coasters that aren't around anymore, what they were like in the 1900s. The ones you see like all those pictures of, and you're like, wow, how did that happen? I feel like this is as close as it gets. It's just absolutely insane. Coming in at number one is the Mock Rides multi launch coaster Icon. This ride is pretty much what I expected it to be. A step below Copperhead Strike at Carowinds, but still a fun experience. First off, let's talk about how weird this coaster is. I'll touch on this a little bit more later, but if you couldn't already tell, Blackpool Pleasure Beach is a historic park filled to the brim with old and rare attractions. I mean, pretty much every coaster in this park is either a wooden coaster that's at least 90 years old or an aerodynamics rare model. So just to plop down a modern Mock Rides launch coaster feels weird. It's kind of like when Holiday World added Thunderbird. Sure, we're not truly complaining about the addition. It's a great ride for sure, but it just clashes with the identity of the park. And then the layout itself is weird because in true Blackpool Pleasure Beach style, they crammed in this ride amongst all the other attractions in the park. The part of the layout near Steeplechase is a bit weird, and then the ending feels like it's just kind of trying too hard while also not providing much. I would have much rather seen a slow inversion instead of the random turns it does at the end. And then on top of that, one of the trains has a spinning car, so just overall, a very weird, unique, and different coaster. There are good moments of airtime, there's some good moments of hang time, there's some good moments of laterals, and then once you decide to shell out the extra money for the spinning car, it's almost like a completely different ride in a good way. And then it has an IMO Score soundtrack, of course, that I loved. It was fantastic. So, while it's most certainly a weird coaster, it was without hesitation my favorite in the park. With the coaster ranking out the way, it's time to move on to any other rides I did at the park. Just like the roller coasters at the park, Blackpool has a unique ride collection that is almost full of timeless classics. Perhaps the most famous is Ghost Train, which is, well, a ghost train. This one was supposedly the first, being built in 1930. And in fact, some people consider this a roller coaster credit. I'm not going to try to add any fuel to the fire. I personally do not consider it a roller coaster, but if you consider it a roller coaster, I totally understand and I respect that opinion. As for the ride itself, it's fine. Definitely feels like a classic, which is good, but I don't think there's anything on this ghost train to separate it from the other similar ride types. I was pretty surprised to see that Blackpool Pleasure Beach had a carousel like Cedar Downs at Cedar Point. Theirs is called Derby Racer and was built in 1959. While the ride system itself is a little worse compared to Cedar Downs, since each horse does not move forwards and backwards, I like the atmosphere on this one so much better. They have a band organ for music, which is awesome. And then you got a disco ball on the center ceiling, which is cool with all the lights and stuff. It's really nice. The last ride we did was right across this ride on the Midway, Flying Machines. Sorry, no picture for this one. This is supposedly the oldest ride at the park, opening in 1904. I have seen a couple of these here and there, but I've never actually ridden one until now at Blackpool, and it was surprisingly a bit of fun. I thought it was going to be, like lackluster, but it does have a bit of a clip spinning around. The wind feels great, and I had a better time on it than I was expecting to have. While technically not a ride, and I also don't have a picture, sorry, we also spent time in their maze called Chinese Puzzle Maze. This was a bit of fun, and it was harder than I thought it was going to be. There are a handful of other rides I did not make it to, most notably the Intamin Log Flume Valhalla. Again, no picture, sorry. This has been voted the best water ride in the world a couple times by the Golden Ticket Awards, most recently in 2023. But if you know me, I don't do water rides because I hate getting wet, especially because we were going straight from Blackpool to the airport, and especially because Valhalla is a soaker. I've heard this is like one of the drenchiest water rides out there, and they literally vacuum water out of the boat after each cycle. It's that insane. So I'm not good on that. They also have river caves, which looked pretty cool. It's a water ride all the way from 1905, but it was under refurbishment when we visited, so didn't get to do that. They have an Alice in Wonderland knockoff, and they also have a Wallace and Gromit dark ride, amongst others. Overall, this park was much different from Thorpe Park and Alton Towers. Both of these parks were great at having great intense thrills with great theming. Blackpool Pleasure Beach leans much more heavily into that classic old school charm. Rides are stacked on top of each other, or they weave within each other everywhere. It's really impressive and cool, especially considering so many of these rides are so old. It's great. It reminded me of Kennywood, just to an even higher degree of classic rides and compactness. While that is most definitely cool, and I did appreciate that aspect, I would definitely take both Thorpe Park and Alton Towers over Blackpool, but that's okay. I would definitely be interested in coming back to Blackpool one day. And with that, that's all I could think about to share about my time at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. Have you been to the park? What do you think of their coaster lineup or any of their classic rides? Feel free to let me know in the comments below. And I appreciate you all for checking out the video. Push down, pull up, exit to the right. Hope you enjoyed the video, and go have your greatest day yet. Choo choo, bye!